Hello, this is one of about 200 talks that I'm recording on the history of Western art, and I've organised these talks into series and episodes, and this is series 61 on recent artists, and this talk is number 5 on the life and work of the British sculptor Antony Gormley, best known for this work, The Angel of the North. But let me start as usual at the beginning. He was born Antony Mark David Gormley in 1950 in Hampstead Garden suburb in London. He grew up in a wealthy Roman Catholic family. His home overlooked a golf course. The family had a cook and a chauffeur. And so from an early age, he had, I think what it's fair to say, a fairly privileged life. His father was an art lover, which is likely to have influenced his future career path. In 1968, he went to Trinity College, Cambridge. He obtained a degree in archaeology, anthropology, and the history of art, and this multidisciplinary education would later inform his artistic practice, providing a deep understanding of human culture and its relationship to the physical world. And it was during this time at Cambridge that he began to take an interest in the human form and its place in the world. In 1971, he completed his degree and began a 3-year journey around India and Sri Lanka, and this had a profound impact on his artistic vision. In India, he observed people sleeping wrapped in saris and dhotis, and it was an image that would later inspire some of his early work, which we'll see next. And the experience also deepened his interest in Buddhism and Eastern philosophy, which would influence his art. He was brought up, of course, a strict Catholic. He attended a Benedictine boarding school, but on his journey around India and Sri Lanka, he lost his Catholic faith and learnt meditation, and that taught him to deal with the here and now. On his return, he produced this Sleeping Place. It's an early work, pivotal in his artistic journey, and what it is a hollow plaster shell which he created by laying plaster-soaked sheets over a friend's body, still hinting, as you can see, at the human form beneath. He was 24 years old, and he was beginning to explore in his art the relationship between the body and its surrounding space, a theme that would become central to his work. His spiritual journey in India also profoundly shaped his artistic perspective, leading him to explore these themes of presence, absence, and the relationship between body and space. So this is one of the early steps towards using the human body as a central element of his work, foreshadowing his later work and more famous sculptures. Bed, 1980 to 81, was a formative work. It uses food as a sculptural material. The piece consists of layers of bread. The negative space on the top is formed by the impression of 2 human bodies, one of which was his own. It was created when he was 30 and reflects his growing interest in the relationship between the body and its surroundings. The use of bread, a staple food, symbol of sustenance, adds another layer of meaning to the piece, exploring themes of consumption, nourishment, and decay. By this point in his life, he'd completed his formal art education and was beginning to establish himself in the London art scene. He had his first solo exhibition, for example, at the Whitechapel Art Gallery in 1981. In order to produce this work, Gormley reportedly ate his way through the equivalent of a body weight in bread to create those negative spaces, jokingly referring to it as the best thing since sliced bread. And again, the work reflects his exploration of the body as a place rather than an object, and he uses bread, a perishable material, to introduce ideas of transformation and impermanence in his work, which again would resonate throughout his career. In case you're wondering or worried perhaps about how Tate Modern maintains this enormous pile of bread, what happened was Gormley first made the work and allowed the bread intentionally to go slightly mouldy. He judged the moment, then disassembled the work and dipped each slice in paraffin wax, and he then reassembled the work, and the paraffin wax sealed the bread, and the Tate, by controlling the temperature and humidity, have successfully maintained the work in the condition he wished for the last 45 years. This is Three Ways, Mould, Hole and Passage, 1981 to 82, a triptych of lead figures. And it's a significant development in his work. The figures derive from a mould of his body, which is a signature technique I'll explain in more detail on the next slide. He created the work in his early 30s, and it explores different ways of representing the human form. The first figure is solid cast, the second is hollowed out, and the third features a passage through the body, and it represents his growing interest in the body as both object and space. By this time, he was just beginning to gain recognition in the art world. As I said, he'd had a solo exhibition in the White Chapel Gallery in 1981, which had been well received. And he was beginning to develop these themes and techniques that would define his work and were beginning to be recognised. The figures are covered in lead, and he chose this material, he said, because of its weight, malleability, and ability to block radiation. And he described lead as a material that comes between the biological and the geological, reflecting his interest in the relationship between the human body and earth. So this body casting technique would become central to his practice, and we'll see more examples later. This is a work called Untitled for Francis, made in 1985. It's a work in Tate Modern that I've taken visitors past and talked about many times. He created many works based on his body, but these works weren't intended to represent him. It's not a portrait of him or even a man. He's examining the physical and spiritual relationship between all humans and the natural world. So it represents us all. And also, he says in his words, sculpture, for me, uses the physical as a means to talk about the spirit, a visual means to refer to things which cannot be seen. End quote. So in other words, he's not even representing the physical nature of human beings. He's using the physical appearance to refer to our place in the world, our spiritual place in the world, things which cannot be seen. But let me first talk about how he made these things. I've got a photo here where you can see he's wrapped in cling film. His naked body is wrapped in cling film by his wife, who you can see, the artist Vicken Parsons. She played a crucial role in the process because she applied the materials and cut him out after the plaster had been set. And when the plaster was applied to his body, you can see there wrapping the plaster over his body and then pushing it around to form the shape of his body, and the plaster will dry and set, which takes a few hours. So he had to stand still in these various positions for a few hours to allow it to dry. I guess his ability to meditate and to hold a position for hours at a time helped in this. So when it was dry, the plaster would be cut off and then pulled away from his body. The two parts would be reassembled and then covered in another layer of fiberglass and resin to create the a sort of shape of his body in a hollow fiberglass mould. Then these 24 sheets you can see of lead were hammered over the fiberglass figure and soldered together. In addition, in this piece, if you look closely, you can see the figure's been pierced at the breast and the hands and the feet with holes that he cut in the lead. And this refers to the part of the title, St. Francis. The title is untitled for Francis, and Francis refers to St. Francis of Assisi, who allegedly received the wounds of Christ in 1224. And that's what's happening here. He's standing feet apart, arms extended, displaying his palms in the position of a Christian saint receiving the stigmata. The stigmata, of course, were the wounds on Christ's body left by the crucifixion, and one of the wounds by the Roman soldier's spear, which was in his side, although Gormley's positioned it in his chest. And he was inspired in this work by Giovanni Bellini, St. Francis in the Desert. This is a detail of the painting, painted in 1480. And you can see the similar position is being taken by St. Francis of Assisi. Now, as I said, Gormley was brought up a Catholic but lost his faith after spending 3 years in India studying the Buddhist meditation. And this refers partly to what this work means. Now, the word to look for meaning in these works, I think, is misleading. The works aren't like a puzzle incorporating a particular meaning. They refer to different things. Gormley has said his work is about our inner life, the boundary between each of us and the world, and the relationship between all of us and the natural world. He isn't trying to create a beautiful object for our enjoyment, to create something that makes us think about who we are and our relationship with the world. And according to Gormley, this work is concerned with our openness to outside experience. And he's mentioned that the holes cut into the lead allow the outside world into us in a similar way to the way we open ourselves to the outside world during meditation. And so we can see that what appears to be a figure is actually being used to convey a number of abstract ideas. And that brings us on to perhaps one of his most famous works, The Angel of the North, perhaps his most iconic and widely recognised work. It's large. You can see that by the size of the people next to it. It's about 20 metres tall and the wingspan is 54 metres, and it overlooks the A1 in Gateshead, northeast England. It was created when he was 48. And in some ways it represents a culmination of his exploration of the human form, and particularly its relationship to the landscape. The sculpture is again based on a cast of his own body, and he's transformed it into this colossal abstract angel figure. He was at the height of his career in the late 1990s. He'd won the Turner Prize in 1994, and he was increasingly working on these large-scale public commissions. Although this one, The Angel of the North, was his most ambitious project to date, and it took 2 years to complete. It was a very large figure that was created and had to be transported to the site in 3 parts: the body, and the two wings separately on 3 separate articulated lorries and then assembled on site. Now, when it was finished, the spectacle of these enormous parts when you drove down the A1 caused quite a stir. It was initially met with mixed reactions by locals. Some called it the Gateshead Flasher because of its outstretched arms. However, it quickly became a beloved landmark and a symbol now of northeast England. Gormley has described the angel as a fusion of the industrial and the organic, and reflecting the transition of the area from coal mining in the past to a post-industrial future. It's actually located on the site of a former colliery, and it's a memorial to the miners who worked beneath the earth for centuries. It's a new phase in his career because it cemented his reputation as a creator of powerful public works and paved the way for future large-scale projects. This is another place, 1997. It's 100 cast iron figures spread out over 3 kilometres of Crosby Beach near Liverpool. We can only see a few of the figures in this picture. Each figure is again cast from his own body. Each figure stands upright and gazes out to sea. They're positioned at various points along the beach so that some are visible only at low tide, and this creates a constantly changing installation as the tides ebb and flow. And by this time, the late 1990s, he was established as one of Britain's leading sculptors. He was awarded the OBE, the Order of the British Empire, in 1997, and increasingly he was working on large-scale public projects. One amusing aspect of this work is its interaction with beachgoers who often dress the figures in various outfits and pose with them for photographs, and that creates this ever-changing participatory artwork. It was a massive undertaking. Each figure weighs 650 kilos and is anchored up to 3 meters deep in the sand, so installing them took several months and required careful planning to work around the tides. It's a meditation on man's relationship with nature and evokes themes of migration, exile, and the human yearning for something beyond our immediate surroundings. It's a very powerful site-specific installation which engages directly with the landscape and with the public. This is a large-scale installation, but indoors. Domain Field consists of hundreds of these ethereal open-work figures created from welded steel bars, and each figure was started based on a volunteer, and those volunteers were from the local Gateshead community, and they ranged in age from 2 years to 85 years old. And these castings were created by first taking a representation of the body using plaster again. By this stage, he was at the peak of his career. He'd been elected to the Royal Academy in 2003, the year this was created. And this work was actually commissioned for the reopening of the Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art in Gateshead. And of course, as I've said, it intensively involved the community in its creation, because each volunteer was wrapped in plaster to create the mould. And then that mould was used as the template for welding together these steel figures. And Gormley has described this as a place of transformation and an architecture of possibility. You can see through the figures, and between them, and this creates a sense of interconnectedness and a shared space. And of course, creating it was a complex process because the public could walk amongst the figures, and so Gormley had to design the placing of the figures so that you could see through the figures to some figures in the distance and then between them into the distance to create this experience of viewing multiple objects at the same time, to create this large-scale community engaged work. Another work that involved the community but in a different way is Event Horizon, a multi-part installation with 31 life-size fiberglass figures and cast iron figures placed in the environment on rooftops and at ground level around urban landscapes to create this silent, watchful presence over the city. The figures are at varying heights, varying distances, and challenge viewers to engage with their surroundings. This photograph is taken from Waterloo Bridge, and the figure is positioned on top of, I think that's Queen Elizabeth Hall. And as I was walking across the bridge on one of my visits to London, I was surprised, because I didn't know it was there, to see this figure on top of the building. But in front of me, just along the bridge, there was another life-size figure I saw. So I guessed that it was an artwork, and probably by Antony Gormley. And I found later in the press, though, that many people had phoned the emergency services because they were concerned that someone was about to commit suicide. It was a complex logistical feat. The cast iron figures weighed 630 kilos and had to be placed very carefully and obviously very securely. So Gormley had to negotiate with building owners and city officials. And the work has been installed in several cities, London as shown here, but also New York, Sao Paulo and Hong Kong. And Gormley described it as his attempt to activate the skyline and encourage people to look around them. So it's the work plays on the ideas of surveillance and being watched. The figures we watch, they are watching us, and it's also questioning our place within the urban landscape. This work, One and Other, is interesting. It's a bit different. He created it when he was 59, and it's a significant departure because it isn't, in a sense, a work by Gormley. It's an idea of Gormley's. He was asked for ideas about how to use an empty plinth in Trafalgar Square in London, called the fourth plinth. And he came up with the idea of living sculptures to explore themes of democracy, representation, and public spaces. It took place over 100 days, and the project involved 2,400 ordinary members of the public, and each was allowed to occupy the plinth for 1 hour and to do whatever they wished. And an amusing aspect of this plinth was the variety, the enormous variety of activities. Let me skip through it.
Speaking to you from death row in Texas. It is everybody's worst nightmare to be executed for a crime they did not commit. I am living that nightmare.
This baby died when he was 4 days old, and that's my son Ellis. Perfectly normal birth, and then when he came home, he died the next day.
And that's Alison, my wife. The specialist said people in her condition have a mean life expectancy of 5 weeks. And that was 4 weeks ago.
the idea of paying tribute to just the three members of my family seemed appropriate somehow.
As soldiers are brave men and I'm proud of them.
Remembering the fallen.
Flight Sergeant Edward George Burton, Sergeant Ernest Claude Hibbert, Sergeant Ned.
From political protests to performance art, marriage proposals, silent meditation, a stage for an enormous variety of human expression. I find it deeply moving, and true art, I guess, it escapes all the big business aspects of the art market, really brings art to the people, and it became one of the most talked about projects and makes me proud to be British. Logistics were complicated. Participants were chosen by ballot and had to follow strict safety guidelines. A crane was used to lift each person on and off the plinth, which was became known as the changing of the guard. And Gormley describes it as a portrait of the UK now, an investigation into the nature of public space in the digital age. The project was live streamed online and blurred the line between the physical and virtual public spaces. And by now, Gormley had become one of the most celebrated artists in the country and was awarded a knighthood in the New Year's Honours List of 2014. Moving on. This is Exposure 2010, made of 5,000 bolted steel components. It's big. It's 25 metres tall. It's one of his largest works. It's positioned on a flood defence system in the Netherlands. And to give you some idea of the size, I've included this photograph to show you the construction workers assembling the work, and you can see from their size and the size of the steel girders just how big it is. Gormley likened it to drawing in space with steel, and it took over 2 months for a team to assemble this work. It's an open lattice structure so that you can see through it. It creates different visual effects depending on the weather and the light. It even produces a haunting whistling sound in strong winds. The crouching figure suggests vulnerability in the face of rising sea levels, and it's a reminder of the need for the Netherlands to maintain their flood defence system, in fact for us all to take note of the changes being brought about by global warming. Field. Thousands of small terracotta figures, each figure hand-sized and unique, with 2 eyes formed by the artist pressing his fingertips into the clay. It was a significant shift in his practice. We're still focused on the human form, but he's moved away from his own body and towards communities of little people. And different versions were made in Mexico, China and the UK. And by the late 1980s, he was gaining an international recognition. He represented Britain at the Venice Biennale in 1982. He had several major solo exhibitions. And the first version of Field, was created in 1989 in Mexico. And I've shown this range of dates, 1989 to 2003, because it was installed and reproduced in many places around the world over this period of time. It occupied an entire gallery floor, creating this sea of small staring creatures. Gormley joked, it's like being stared at by the world. And the creation of these little figures involved entire families and communities. In Mexico, for example, the Texca family of brickmakers produced 35,000 figures in a week. And so this collaborative aspect of the work was crucial to Gormley, who saw it as a way of democratizing art making. And it reflects his growing interest in the relationship between individuals and the masses. This is model. It's although I'm showing you here an actual model of the work, which is called model, it was assembled and was a colossal steel sculpture that viewers could enter and explore. And the reason I'm showing you this model is because is looking down from above, and you can see the size in relationship to the human figure shown bottom left. But in practice, it was assembled from 104 interconnected steel boxes. It weighed over 100 tons, and it was assembled on site in the White Cube Gallery. It took several weeks. And then when you visited, you could go inside the work and walk around the work. It was a meditation on the darkness of the body. It was dark inside. It was difficult to tell up from down, left from right. And it's a work that is a meditation on his interest in the body as a site of transformation and exploration. And in this case, as I said, he effectively allows you to enter the body and move around it. Another way of moving around his sculpture is shown here in Fit 2016. It's a large scale installation of 15 interconnected chambers, each containing an abstract iron sculpture, sometimes in multiple parts. And what he did is transform the gallery space into this labyrinth that visitors can walk around and navigate. And so he designed the works in order to be seen through entrance ways, and so it's the interaction between multiple pieces as you see them in relationship to a piece in another chamber behind them. And it challenges traditional modes of viewing in that way, because the visitors have to physically navigate the space. Some of the entrances need to be squeezed through narrow passageways. Some you need to duck under. And so it makes it a highly physical and personal experience. Obviously, to create it, he had to do many precise calculations and do a lot of planning with models so that the specific spatial experience, the sight lines and so on, were correct. And he had to transform the entire gallery space into this set of 15 interconnected chambers in order to explore what he called the relationship between the body and space. A different relationship here, his stand is a public art installation outside the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It's 10 cast iron blockwork sculptures, each over 10 feet tall, each weighing nearly 3 tons, and it's on the steps of the Philadelphia Art Museum in 2019. He used cantilevers and props and pier and lintel construction to join all these pieces together. It's in many ways more abstract than some of his other pieces. And what he's done is bring the art outside the museum and released it into the cities. It doesn't, however, give a good idea of it from this direction. So I'll show you a photograph taken from the other side of these pieces, looking out towards the city. So you can see the pieces in front of us, and you can see from here that they're on a hill looking towards the city, and in some ways mimicking the shape of the city hall, the skyscrapers around it, and the sculpture in front of it. And it gives another perspective on the cityscape. It's related to and encourages people to look at their city for the first time Just to give you a quote, Philadelphia is extraordinary because of the way there is this dialogue between the Museum of Fine Art that occupies the highest possible space within the city, and at the other end is City Hall. And then when he was asked whether the sculptures represent bodies, he said, "The degree to which they are bodies, I think, is the degree to which there is something to recognise, and to that degree they are distinct from pure abstraction." End quote. In other words, you could see them as abstract pieces, but when you look at them closely, they have the form of the body, and to that extent, the degree to which we recognise elements of the body, they are distinct from pure abstraction. This is New York Clearing 2020. It's a vast site-specific installation made of 11 miles of square aluminium tubing, bent and coiled to create this giant three-dimensional drawing in space. That's what Gormley called it, a drawing in space, which viewers can walk through and around. By this time he was 70 years old, and it's a significant departure from his figurative sculptures. He's continuing to explore space and the body, but in a more abstract and immersive way. He built this in Brooklyn Bridge Park, or he had it built there under his direction. It was bent on site by a team of installers, and it took several weeks and attracted much attention from park visitors. So as people move through the sculpture, their perception of it constantly changes, and it creates this dynamic and interactive experience. Which brings us to time horizon 2024. I'm recording this talk in 2025. So last year, the beginning of last year, he installed this in Houghton Hall in Norfolk. It's 100 life-size figures scattered across 300 acres of parkland around Houghton Hall. Again, the cast iron figures weigh some 620 kilos and stand about 190 centimetres tall. And the interesting thing, I think, is they're all installed at the same level. That is the same distance from the centre of the earth. And that means that some are buried up to the top of their head, and some of them, a quarter of them, are on plinths, on columns. The highest is 4 metres high. So it's an immersive experience which Gormley encourages you to walk around. Another quote from Gormley: "My ambition for this show is that people should roam far and wide. Art has recently privileged the object rather than the experience that objects can initiate. Time horizon is not a picture, it's a field, you are in it. The work puts the experience of the subject, visitor, protagonist on an equal footing with all material presences, organic and inorganic." And he also added, "The quality of the light, the time of the year, the state of the weather, and the condition of your mind, body and soul are all implicated in the field." And he's emphasising the dynamic and personal nature of the experience that he's created. And then the final work I wanted to show you, which is also produced last year, True for Alan Turing. It's a 370, that is a 3.7 metre tall figure installed at King's College, Cambridge in January last year. And it honours the life and achievements of Alan Turing, the mathematician and code breaker who helped crack the Enigma code during World War II. And it reflects his brilliance and vulnerability and symbolises the transition from the industrial age of steel to the information age. It's made of 140mm thick-rolled Corten steel, which is a material he's used before, as it has a 1% copper content, which means the steel slowly rusts, which adds a patina of red to the figure over time. It's located between the Gibbs Building and Webb's Court at King's College, and so can be seen by students and college staff. And one of the reasons it's there is that Turing attended King's College between 1931 and 1934. Gormley said, quote, "I wanted to make the best sculpture I could to honour a man who was pivotal in changing the course of all our lives. It's not about the memorialisation of a death, but a celebration of the opportunities that a life allowed." End quote. Now, at the time, there were people and organisations who criticised the sculpture and tried to stop it being installed, but I think it's a fine tribute to a brilliant man. In fact, the word brilliant hardly does him justice. Experts have estimated he helped save 14 to 21 million lives by shortening the war by 2 to 4 years. And his paper on artificial intelligence, called Computing Machinery and Intelligence, I feel is one of the most profound yet down-to-earth analyses of the subject I've read. But I thought I would end with Another Place, his 1997 work, as it's based on his universal theme of the human body in nature. It talks of loneliness, solitude, and the wonder of nature. Incidentally, as a footnote, I thought I would add, as I mentioned artificial intelligence just now, about my project. My project is to replace myself by the end of 2026, and to that end, I've been using ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini, and Copilot to help me with my research. They've also helped me write Python programs to turn the research notes into slides. And I have also reproduced my voice, but I can't yet sync that with the slide changes. So what you're looking at is still me talking. Also, I've found that those systems don't do a good job finding the right images, so I have to find the images myself. And also, I still have to sort out all the detailed issues that arise while correct the research notes. But anyway, that's enough for now. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to recording the next talk for you. Goodbye for now.